This video brought to you by our two executive producers, Kozmosaur and Tom Dolan. Thank you.
Hello friends and welcome to the second episode of the Media Theory series thing, and today we're going to be talking about reading positions, which, just to clarify, isn't the best position to read a book in, which according to Google is any one of these. I don't know, I don't really read print books anymore. Reading positions is part of a theory developed by communications and cultural studies scholar Stuart Hall in 1973 in a thing he called encoding and decoding. I'm going to keep referring to it as reading positions because that's what I was taught it was called, so that's what it's been named in my head, I guess, and changing habits is hard and unnecessary. Before we get into that, I'm going to define some words because we're going to be saying the words hegemonic and hegemony a lot during this video, because this is the kind of area in which media studies does this weird thing where it blurs the line between actual media studies and like sociology and cultural studies, which I know a lot of people don't like, but once you get deep into media studies, it's kind of impossible to avoid, because hegemony refers to the power structures at play in society, and hegemonic is anything that refers back to those studies, and you can't really discuss the media without talking about the power structures behind it. And these power structures can be monarchy or government, or contrarily it can be like very, very rich people, or even just a subsection of society that has power like due to some sort of systemic oppression. So we're going to be using those words, and while we're defining words, a reader is anyone that reads a text. Reading a text is just consuming that text, and a text is any media piece, and that could be a book or a TV show, film, comic book, painting. All of these count as text, and anyone that consumes them are called readers. They're terms from way back when it was just like literature, but they just sort of stuck. Anyway, let's move on to our mate Stu. Stuart Hall was a Jamaican scholar working in Birmingham University's Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies when he published his 1973 essay, Encoding and Decoding in the Television Discourse, right in between writing two books about everyone's favourite big red beardy man, Karl Marx. In this far less Marx-laden essay, Hall offered a theoretical approach of how media messages are produced, disseminated, and interpreted. Hall proposed that audience members can play an active role in decoding messages, as they rely on their own social constructs, contexts, and might even be capable of changing messages themselves through collective action. Simply put, encoding and decoding is the process of translating a message, because a creator encodes a message and the viewer decodes, but of course anyone that's ran a message through Google Translate knows it's a little more complicated than just an in and out. In the essay, Hall talked about two different models of media communication. Firstly, he talked about the more traditional model and criticized it for its one-wayness. There's the sender, who sends the message to the receiver, who receives the message, like computers handling code. He talked about its lack of structured conception of various moments as a structure of complex relations. What that basically means is like there are in moments in a message where things can happen, things can get changed, things can get translated, and this old school one-way system does not account for that at all. He proposed that there's more to the process of communication than just robots passing an identical series of bleeps and bloops. Of course he didn't say that because it was the 70s. He proposed a four-stage model of communication that takes into account the various aspects of media messaging. In contrast to the more traditional linear approach of the sender and receiver, he perceives each of these steps as both autonomous and interdependent. And what that means is, while none of them have control over the other stages, and they all have the power to alter the message on their own, not one stage can deliver a full message. It takes all four stages to manufacture the message. Hall further explains that the meanings and messages in the more meandering process are organized through the rules of each stage, so it has to go all the way through one stage before it can go all the way through the next. There's no skipping, there's no backtracking, nothing like that. Each stage will affect the message being conveyed as a result of its discursive form, e.g. practices, instruments, relations. If no meaning is taken, there can be no consumption. Each of these steps helps define the one that follows while remaining clearly distinct, with no control over the other stages in the process, like we said before. These four stages are production, circulation, consumption, and reproduction, and I'm just going to whiz through them one by one because they're pretty self-explanatory. Production is where the encoding, which is the construction of the message, begins. Production process has its own multidiscipline, or like discursive aspect as he calls it, since the creator is going to be influenced by society, hegemony, and their own beliefs, as well as the numerous factors and people that are influenced in the production process as well, like studio execs and producers and writers and even the stars in the thing themselves. They're all going to be influenced by their own thing, and it's all going to be but for the sake of this, the production is one stage. Hall defined two major aspects of production encoding, the first being the production structures of television, which, this is going to be a bit of a word soupy quote, and I'm sorry, but it's going to be on the screen. Knowledge in use concerning the routines of production, technical skills, professional ideologies, institutional knowledge, definitions and assumptions about the audience. The other is the wider socio-cultural or political culture, which he says, again, topics, treatments, agendas, events, personnel, images of the audience, definitions of the situation from other sources, and discursive formations. So those are the two sort of areas that take into account when you're encoding a message. Circulation is fancy words for how the individual will see the product, for example, visually in a video like this, or written in an essay or a Wikipedia article. How things are circulated influence how audience members will receive the message, and ergo how they will put them to use. I'm trying to, as an example of this, I'm trying to make this kind of easy to understand, despite having to pepper in the long words that I don't really like. And I'm hoping that will make more people take on the message and use it in their day-to-day lives. Consumption is how an audience uses the message. According to Stuart Hall, for a message to be successfully realized, the broadcasting structures must yield encoding messages in the form of a meaningful discourse. This means that the viewer must acknowledge the message in play, and it has to be meaningfully decoded. However, the decoding and interpreting of a message requires an active participant. If you're only half paying attention, you're not going to pick up on the message as encoded, or even as you would decode it if you were engaged. And finally, reproduction. The stage is directly after an audience member has interpreted a message in their own way based on their experiences and beliefs. The decoded meanings are the ones that have some form of effect on the reader with, quote, very complex perceptive, cognitive, emotional, ideological, or behavioral consequences. At this point, you will see whether individuals take action after they have been exposed to a specific message. But Brett, I hear you cry. I said, I hear you cry.
But Brett!
Much better. What does any of this have to do with reading positions? Well, we're getting to that right now, because Hall wrote about 3 positions that people may take upon decoding a television message. Because, again, to quote him, decodings do not follow inevitably from encodings. A message is encoded on television in a particular way, but that does not mean it will be decoded in that way. This lays the foundation for Hall's 3 hypothetical positions. He needs 3 because there are multiple interpretations that could occur, and well, they can be vaguely dropped into one of 3 categories. These positions are known as the dominant hegemonic position, the negotiated position, and the oppositional position. Again, I'm going to whiz through those one by one. The dominant or hegemonic position is one of agreement with the encoder's message. If you take the dominant position, you have managed to decode the message exactly as the producer wanted you to. Here, there's barely any misunderstanding because both the sender and the receiver have the same cultural biases. This means that the intended message was created by the dominant class, and the recipient was also part of the dominant class. Now, because of this, there's no misunderstanding due to there basically being really similar. But the assumption here is that every piece of media is made from the dominant class, and we'll get to that. Just take that assumption and put it in your back pocket. We're going to get to that later. A quick and dirty example of this reading is any advert ever. Let's take an advert for a Big Mac. The dominant reading position is, I like Big Macs. I'm going to go get a Big Mac right now. Or next time I'm hungry, I'm going to get a Big Mac. Because the intent of an advert is advertising a product. So if you then want the product, you have been taking the dominant position. The second position is the negotiated position. In this position, the reader both accepts and rejects certain elements of the message. The reader acknowledges the dominant message, they get it, but they're not completely willing to accept it the way it was intended. To put this in the words of the big man himself, decoding within the negotiated position contains a mixture of adaptive and oppositional elements. It acknowledges the legitimacy of the hegemonic definitions to make grand significations, while at a more restricted situational level, it makes its own rules. It operates within exceptions to the rule. Basically, this is when you understand what the creator's putting down and you kind of jive with it, but only somewhat. Again, let's look at advertising. In its basis form, a negotiated reading of an advert is, again, let's go to this Big Mac. That looks nice. I do like the idea of that Big Mac, but I'm not hungry. Or at the minute, I can't afford it. So you agree with what you are picking up what the advertiser is putting down, but for a reason related to your own individual experience, you cannot agree completely and go and do what they want you to do. And finally, we have the oppositional reading position. Now, from the name alone, we should be able to figure this one out. In this reading, you acknowledge the intentional reading, but much like Adam Savage in reality, you have rejected it and substituted in your own. This will be highly based on personal experiences and viewpoints, so it is, again, highly personal to the reader. To continue our Big Mac example, the usual oppositional reading is, I do not like this product or this company, I'm not going to buy this Big Mac because McDonald's is shit. So that is kind of like, that's basically all that reading positions is. You may have already spotted some glaring omissions in it, and so we're going to go through that. We're going to go through a couple of those now. For some reason, Stu made the assumption that every piece of media is created in the same mindset of this, like, hegemony. Now, this was pre-70s, this was like early 70s, so it was, as far as entertainment goes, it was, of course, pre-YouTube, pre-Netflix. It was even pre-VHS. So he kind of had a point. The only things that the average person would see would be backed by a major production company full of execs and sponsors and ad revenue that would push them into the safest, most dominant positions of society. And that's not really the case anymore. With alternative ideas coming way more easy to create, way more easy to disseminate, there are people making lots of media outside of the dominant position. Heck, I do it. So to deal with this little wrinkle, Sven Ross, a man with a name so generic that I couldn't actually find a picture and determine whether or not it was him. So Sven Ross is going to be played by Wilson from Castaway. Sven came up with a new approach to reading positions. This new approach was to make it explicit whether or not the text itself was dominant, negotiated, or oppositional. He then changed the wording of the original reading position to reflect whether or not it was the reader accepting the messages in the text without assuming their hegemonic roots. What we're left with is this table. And as you can see from this very easy to understand table, the leftmost column is the original Stuart Hall model from earlier in the video. However, two more columns have emerged based on the encoding of the text. A negotiated text, that's this middle column right here, is one that has a mix of agreement and disagreement with the hegemonic position. Say, liberals, centrists. Then on the right we have radical text, such as BreadTube, or equally, like, far-right productions such as, like, InfoWars and Dave Rubin. Is he still a thing? Taking the bottom right corner approach, we have the text oppositional reading of an oppositionally encoded text. This is called neutralization. This means decoding a radical text with a dominant ideology, such as, for example, socialism will never work, so it's not worth thinking about the way things work, because the way things work. Or just, outright rejecting all radical ideologies in the text. So, take Parasite, not liking Parasite because poor people are never that desperate. They just need to work harder. Or, something like that. Something along those lines. So that's kind of all that reading positions is. As with the last video, I'm going to try and make this a bit clearer by going through some like off the top of the dome examples, like in real time, so you can see how these reading positions take effect while you're conscious. But for now, that's reading positions. If you have any questions about this, drop them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them as well as I can. Or if you want to leave a comment for just algorithmic reasons, just tell me I look nice today. I kind of filmed this last minute, that's why I'm in a different place, and I'd like to know that I look nice. If you want to see more of me, the like and subscribe buttons are down below, as the links to my Twitch and Twitter are in the underground. If you want to support me in what I do, you can support me on Patreon like all the lovely people on screen do. And a special shout out goes to my dog that just woofed, and the fresh cheese bags of the month. The horse of many names, Alex Bryson, Mulloy, neuroticanarchy, the Magpie Magus, What Would Jedi Do, Ethan Safron, Karl Raade, and our two executive producers, Kozmosaur and Tom Dolan. Catch you on the flippity flop. Love you, bye.